Hello everybody, welcome to this week's live stream. If you haven't attended one of these before, I normally do them every Friday, and we have a look at some of the major announcements for next week, what to watch out for, and then we go through the major markets, stock market indices, currencies, metals, energy, Bitcoin, all the usual. And if there's any stuff you want looking at, if you put it in the chat, the YouTube chat, I'll take a look at those as well. An interesting week. We had those Nvidia earnings, didn't we, the other day, and they came in better than expected. I think it was interesting. The stock went down yesterday, though. The earnings were here. They closed at 126 on Wednesday. Nvidia opened at 121 yesterday, and here we are at 118. So even though they beat their earnings, not much conviction to buy the shares. So that would tend to suggest to me that, you know, a lot of that momentum has clearly left the stock. You know, we saw the all-time high was back in June, so it's a couple of months ago now. So I thought that was interesting. We've just had or an hour ago, I should say, the consumer expenditure data from the US, which is what is it? It's the Fed's preferred inflation thing. So we've seen a bit of a lift for the US dollar. I do wonder if there's a short trade here. Actually, we'll take a look at this in a bit more detail when we get into it. And what are US markets doing? Up from yesterday's close. I went short the NASDAQ yesterday. I thought that it was going to go down maybe to 19,000. I came out of it overnight for a profit, but I thought there was going to be more in it than there was. But we'll take a look at this as well. So there's lots to watch, I think. Not for me, not so much to do at the moment, apart from this afternoon, perhaps a short in this dollar index. But more of that in a couple of minutes. Let's get into it. Let's get some of the housekeeping stuff out of the way. This presentation is only for educational purposes. It does not contain and should not be construed as containing investment advice or an investment recommendation, or an offer of or solicitation for a transaction in any financial instrument. David Jones accepts no responsibility for any use that may be made of these comments and for any consequences that result. You should consider whether you understand how spread bets, CFDs, futures, foreign exchange work, and whether you can afford to take the high risk of losing your money. Trading is risky. All right, let's take a look. So next week, it's quite a busy week next week. We've got some sort of inflation-y type data for the US on Tuesday and Thursday. The ISM manufacturing data on Tuesday and the ISM services data on Thursday. On Wednesday, we've got Australian GDP. How well or not is the Australian economy doing? And on Friday, it's really the big one. We've got EU, European Union GDP in the morning. And at 1:30 UK time on Friday, an hour before the US market opens, we have the non-farm payrolls, so the monthly unemployment numbers. So as usual, I'll be back this time next week and we'll see how markets react to that. So I think it is an interesting time at the moment. You know, we've seen this fantastic rise for stock markets off those lows since August. Let's take a look. Let's jump into markets and take a look at some stuff. Let's start with stock markets. Let's start off as usual with the S&P 500. So the broader US stock market. Let me just take some of these short-term levels off. So this is where we are. You know, the trend is up since October 22. So what's that? 22 months into that trend? Something like that. Big sell-off. Beginning of the month, the market went from 56, nearly 57, down to 51. So a 10% drop. And here we are. We are, within not very much of the old all-time high, about 50 points away, so 1% away from the previous all-time high. Interesting up here, if you thought that US markets, we've seen the best for US markets for a while, this is the place to go short. If I was going to go short up here, go short now with a stop, I don't know, above 57 maybe. So 80, 90 points risk. And if the market did drop all the way back to just even the August low, there's 500 points in that trade. So that's quite interesting. I think for now, in the short term at least, I think these markets are still strong. The S&P anyway, we're still seeing the dips getting bought. This has been a bit of a hurdle, 56.50 or thereabouts over the last week or so. Let's see what happens this afternoon. So a bit sideways on the S&P over the last week. Coming to the NASDAQ, the NASDAQ is not near its all-time high. It's a bit of a different story for the NASDAQ. Let me just take these alerts off because they were for old trades I had, which have gone now. So I don't know on the NASDAQ, to be honest. I'd still rather be going short based off the hourlies. The trade I did yesterday, I run a WhatsApp group. I talked about it in the morning, said that was the trade I was really waiting for. And it was a really logical trade to do yesterday. I was a bit early, as per usual. But, I was thinking that was Wednesday. We see the market sell off on Wednesday. So we had for the previous, 4 trading sessions, a sliding market. So coming into yesterday, I wanted to sell the NASDAQ. And I was waiting for the afternoon session to sell it. So I sold it in here somewhere on the way up. And really looking at the highs of the last couple of days to be something of a barrier. And that did end up being the case. It worked really well, that trade. There you go. And it sold off really hard whenever that was. I was out for a walk, so I came back and I was quite glad to see that. Moved the stop down. And then it's bounced back overnight. So I made, I don't know what I made, maybe 100 points, 90, 100 points on the trade. But it's bounced back. So for me, I think today, the trade, if I did do a trade in this today, the trade I'd be looking for, does it rally up near 19.6 again, yesterday's highs? Do we see a bit of weakness come in and then go short? But I think that's interesting, to see. The NASDAQ is perhaps more interesting than the S&P in the short term for me, just to see what happens with this slide that we've been in since last Thursday. Does it go blasting out and we start looking at 20,000, or is it going to be under pressure again? I don't know. Let's see what happens. So that's that. That's the NASDAQ, one to watch for this afternoon. The Dow has actually scraped out to fresh all-time highs this week. So the Dow, of course, different mix-up, very different mix-up to the NASDAQ and a different mix-up to the S&P. So that's still looks strong, the old Dow. So I would be buying the dips on that one. So it's quite, we are seeing quite the shift between all the different sectors in the US at the moment. The Russell, the smaller cap, I don't know. I'd buy the dip if it dipped back near the August lows. It's a bit sort of hanging around in the middle at the moment, isn't it? So not much. So for me, for US markets, the NASDAQ is the most interesting. The FTSE, I wonder, would you go short the FTSE? There's definitely an argument in the short term. The trend is absolutely up, of course. This is from the COVID lows, that trend, and more recently, since October last year. But we're bubbling around near these highs from the beginning of the month, just before the market plummeted. So perhaps not today, but I think that's an interesting one for next week, this 8,400 sort of area. And again, for me, if I was doing a more medium-term short on that, I'd put a stop above these old highs from May, which are only at 84.76. So maybe an 8,500 plus stop on that if I was going short. Interesting to see what happens with all of that. The Australian index, bit scrappy. Oh, what is going on with that line? Doesn't make much sense, does it? Bit scrappy. I'm still long the Aussie index from about May. And the trade is in profit. It just hasn't done well. It's been pretty volatile, as you can see. What happens next week? Do we get a breakout next week to all-time highs on the Aussie? Or does it turn down again? So again, I think there's a question. If you want to go short, there's some obvious reference levels for stop losses and stuff. So a lot of these markets, there's an argument for either way at the moment. China, I would buy the dip. There's arguably a trade there, isn't there? Let's have a look at that. The China 50, the China A50. Had been down, had the bounce correction. Is it still correcting? Maybe it is still correcting. Maybe I need to be a bit more patient there. Perhaps there's nothing there yet for me, but that's another interesting one for next week. The French one, French index, again, obviously a strong bounce back. We've got this problem area. This is another one. I think I flagged it up this morning in the WhatsApp group. One for maybe next week for me. What happens around this old high, 77.50? 100 points away from where we are now. Do we see some caution come back into this market? I don't know. But an interesting one for next week. Probably in the very short term, I'd still be a buyer of the dip. Same with the DAX, the German market. What a trend that has been. And I have just sat there and watched it and not participated. But a cracking trend. Even though we've seen somewhat sideways markets in the US for the last week, the Germans don't care. Just carry on, powering higher. So we had all-time highs yesterday for the DAX, breaking out through May's all-time high. And not quite taking those out today, but absolutely cracking trend. What's that done since that bounce there? 17.2 to 18.9. So it's done, 10% rally over the last 4 weeks or so, 3.5 weeks in the DAX. So that looks interesting, breaking out to all-time highs. Let's see what happens next week with that. Japan, I don't know what I'd do with that one either. That was the hindsight trade, is to go back and buy that dip to the old lows. That was phenomenal, wasn't it? That sell-off we saw that really, I think, kicked off a lot of the panic in stock markets. But that was a phenomenal sell-off, a 30% drop or something in about 3 weeks. And it's bounced back up. So, I don't know what I'd do with that one. The Hong Kong Hang Seng. I should have paid a bit more attention to this, because I was looking to buy the dip. And I should have bought about 17,000, and here we are at 18,000. But with that, we had been in this slide all the way through 23, broke out in April of this year, sold off, retest, bang, off we go again. So I would be a buyer of a dip in the Hong Kong Hang Seng. So lots to watch there with stock markets. For me, like I say, the most immediate one, the NASDAQ for this afternoon. If I did a trade, I'd probably go short if it pushed a little bit higher and ran out of steam. Let's see what happens there. So that's the what's it, stock markets. The dollar index. It's interesting down here because it's been a pretty sideways 18 months or so for the dollar index. So this is the US dollar against a basket of different currencies. But we are down to, I suppose, what have been cyclical lows for the US dollar. July last year, it based at 99.50. December, 100.6. We've seen 100.5. Are we going to see a turnaround again for the dollar from here? Perhaps, from a more medium-term point of view, I'd be thinking about buying the dip. From a more short-term point of view, I still quite fancy going short, because the trend has been down since June. Bang, bang, bang. Hit a new low for the trend on Tuesday this week. Yes, we have had the bounce back, but so far at least we haven't taken out what for me are some important short-term levels. So this is another one maybe for this afternoon for me. If we saw a bit of weakness, it's had a lift off that inflation data at half one today, but does it start to stall? So I think that's an interesting one to watch this afternoon. In other currency markets, pound against the dollar, I'm still long some. I did 3 trades pound against the dollar on the way up. I came out with 2 of them earlier this week for a profit. I'm still in one that's currently losing money. I've got a stop around about 130.50. And I'm just really seeing, is this a correction? I think it is for now. And are we going to hook our way back up to 132.50? Let's see. Let's see what happens. So I think that's an interesting market to watch next week, pound against the dollar, because it did briefly this week hit its best levels since March 22. So 2-year highs on the pound. So I think that's an interesting market. I'm long at the moment, losing money on the last of the longs. But interesting to see if those lows, 130.75 lows, hold on that. Euro dollar, I'm guessing is going to look a little bit similar. Yeah, not quite as strong as the pound against the dollar. Still below last year's high. So that's perhaps an interesting one. What else should we look at? Gold and silver. Gold, I mean, all-time highs on gold this month. It's been a bit quiet over the last week and a half or so. But I would still, buy the dip on gold. You can see it has been a bit sideways. So for me, the opportunity is, what is the opportunity? Maybe if it, at the moment, the closest I would want my stop on gold would be the other side of this 24.70 low. So again, next week, if we see a bit of a sell-off on gold, it's perhaps an interesting one. But, undeniably positive. Here we are. Well, what's gold done this year in percentage terms? So it ended last year around 2063, 2060, let's call it. So it's up not quite $500. So it's up about 20%, which is great, isn't it? That's a great return. 6 months, 7 months, 8 months into the year. That's all right, isn't it? So in dollar terms. So that's done okay. Silver, I was thinking about buying it this week, but I didn't. Silver, it's always a bit of a funny one, I find, silver. But there's our trend, our short-term trend on silver for much of this month. There's an argument, if you wanted to be a buyer with stops below 28.50 or something like that. Maybe. Let's see what happens. Oil, I've traded oil not well, suboptimally over the last couple of weeks. I was long and I got stopped, and I was short and I got stopped. And it's all been a bit sideways, hasn't it, oil? But clearly there's a big base down here, around about 71 on oil. There's a bit of a tighter base at 72.20 for this month. Oh, it's got really clobbered today, hasn't it? It's been a bit sideways overall this month, hasn't it? Big range, 10% range, but all of it sideways overall. So I'm a bit on the sidelines when it comes to oil. Natural gas, I was short natural gas. That worked well from up here. I think I did it on the video earlier this week. Talked about that trade. I came out of that, I think it would have been here on Wednesday of this week. It's an interesting one, natural gas, because what do you think? There's an argument, as usual, there's an argument for being a buyer or a seller. So you could take the view the market since June has slid from 3 down to 185. So it's lost, what's that? 40%, 35%, something like that. So are we near the bottom of the range again? And up we go. But if you stick on the hourlies, the trend is still down. But again, a bit like oil, really. I suppose it's a bit sideways overall over the last month or so. So interesting to watch. Not really a compulsion for me to do anything at the moment in natural gas. If you really wanted to buy it, I'd have a stop at least the other side of 185. And that's been the low for the month so far. So that's maybe interesting. But yeah, not much else. Heating oil, I missed the trade, and I missed it again today on heating oil. I think I thought there was a good trade earlier in the week. The trend is down on heating oil, bang, 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 bang. And it rallied up, a bit like my natural gas trade, to be honest. Old highs, couldn't get through them, and falls. Again, I don't know. It is still weak, heating oil. But what's interesting, we're getting close to these lows from May 2023 that were a big turning point. So do we see heating oil turn around again and rally? I don't know. For me, the trend is still down at the moment, so I'm not in too much of a hurry to do much on that at the moment. What else? What else is interesting? What haven't we looked at? Bitcoin. It's a bit boring, Bitcoin, isn't it? I looked at that this morning. I mean, the big trend is up since whenever, November 22. But since March of this year, so it's that 5 months now, 5.5 months, it's just been a bit drifty, hasn't it? So yeah, nothing too exciting really for me in there, to be honest. So I think it's a bit of a boring day for me today. I think when I finish this, I'll be pretty much finished for the day. But I think for me, the markets to watch for the rest of today is this NASDAQ, which already looks to have turned down a little bit. see what happens if it gets near yesterday's highs. What happens there? I think that's quite interesting. The dollar index, because the big trend is down, although we are near what has been an important low over the last 7 or 8 months or so. So I think they're quite interesting to watch this afternoon. And everything else at the moment for me is a bit on the back burner for next week. And I think a lot does depend what happens with this dollar. If we see dollar weakness, then of course we'd expect the price of gold to go up. We'd expect the price of pound against the dollar to go up. So let's see what happens with this US dollar. But I think NASDAQ is interesting anyway for this afternoon. And these European markets like the DAX and the French index, because they have been much stronger over the last week than the American markets. So interesting to see where that all goes next week. So that's that. That's it for the usual markets I look at. We'll take a look at the stuff you want looking at in a sec. But first of all, a quick commercial break. I run a WhatsApp group. I've been running it for 18 months now. There's a couple of daily updates from me, markets I'm watching, what I think is interesting, trades I'm in, the levels I'm looking at, all that sort of stuff. Q&A. We had a bit of a discussion today about how long does it take to be profitable when you're trading. So I try and give just my benefit of my experience on that. If you sign up, you want to try it for a month. If you use the code YouTube, the link and all the gubbins is in the description to the video. You can try it for a month and see what you think. And if you don't like it, you can leave after a month and it'll cost you less than the price of a cup of coffee per day. And not many people do leave after a month, which I'm glad to say. So I'm glad that hopefully people do find it useful. But try it and see what you think. That's a screenshot of a typical update from me. Markets to watch. I run a trading course that's got 5-star Trustpilot reviews. You can find out information about that on the website. There's a newsletter that is free of charge that I send out every Saturday, usually. If you're not subscribed to that, if you go to the website, again, the link is in the description, and you can sign up for free to that newsletter if you go on the front page. I am going to revamp my website at some point, but I just really can't be bothered. But I will get around to it. If you go to the website, put your email in there, you'll get subscribed to the newsletter, and that's it. And if you've got any questions, drop me an email. My email address is dj@davidjonestrading.co.uk if you have any questions. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions. And finally, if you want to find out who I trade with, go to bit.ly/DavidTrade. Okay, that's that. Let's take a look at some of the stuff you want looking at. Let's see what's happening. What's happening with this dollar? I do think that is a short this afternoon. Let's see how that works out. What do we want to look at? Hello, Nick. Can we look at XLB? That was the Materials Select Sector ETF, isn't it? So an exchange-traded fund that tracks the materials sector in the US, and that looks like that's breaking out again. So we did look at that earlier this week, didn't we? So it's interesting because it's been pretty sideways for the last 2.5 years. These were the old highs up at 92. And it had a go at breaking out in April. And here we are, just as we speak, nudging out again. Is that an all-time high? It certainly looks like it. So it's an all-time high. So let's say you believed the breakout. And at the moment, I would probably lean to believe the breakout. So I'd be a buyer. The only question is, where does your stop go? Which is always a big question for me. Where does my stop go? And I don't know. I think at the moment, if I was a buyer at 93.70, I'd want my stop the other side of at least 89. So the thing is breaking out. I want to try and jump on it in case this breakout develops into a new trend. I also want to avoid getting stopped out in any chopperama. So I would put my stop based off the daily chart down there. If I was trading it off an hourly, which I wouldn't, maybe 90, 50, but I still like that level as a stop. So I think that's interesting. Let's come back and look at it again next week. But we are seeing it just today have a little sniff out to all-time highs. So interesting to see if this is the start of a new era for the Materials Selector Spider Exchange Traded Fund. But it does show you Materials sector, I'm guessing, is quite old-fashioned traditional companies. You know, and it does show you the difference in US stock markets at the moment, where we have the likes of the Dow out to all-time highs, and the likes of the NASDAQ not out to all-time highs. You know, so there is that bit of a, you know, we've seen the tech companies strong all year, and we are seeing some of the more traditional blue chips being strong more recently. So that's an interesting one. Let's have a look again next week. What's your opinion on Abercrombie and Fitch? Abercrombie and Fitch. Too trendy for me. That's my opinion. But let's have a look. I'm surprised they're doing as well as that. I would have thought they might have been sliding a lot, that they'd maybe fallen out of fashion. So that's the clothing company, isn't it? So what a run they've had. So where have they gone from? So they've gone from May 23, $23 to $144 today. That is amazing. That is amazing for a retailer. A 7-fold increase. What have they started doing? They started making GPUs for crypto mining or something. I mean, that is an incredible run. I'd be a buyer. They've had earnings, I guess, this week, haven't we? So we've had the gap on earnings. So for me, it's lost some of the momentum since May. But for me, if I had to do a trade on it now, I'd probably be a buyer. I'd feel a bit less comfortable than I would have been buying into this trend, the Harry hindsight trade. But for me, I'd be a buyer, taking the view, has it overreacted on earnings? So an aggressive stop for me would be underneath the Wednesday low, so underneath $134. A more relaxed stop for me would be underneath the August lows down at 120. So yeah, I take the view, have we seen a bit of an overreaction? Is it going to claw its way back up to 170? Blah, blah, blah. Let's see what happens. But yeah, I'm quite surprised by that one. Can I have a look at Nvidia? Yeah, Nvidia. I mean, someone mentioned it in the WhatsApp group yesterday. And I said for me, I thought, you know, if I had to do anything today, I'd be short. Because we had the earnings, they beat expectations, but it still went down, didn't it? So what do you do? I think the game has moved on from Nvidia. That's what I think. You know, I think we had, obviously, it was an absolute powerhouse from, you know, December 22, $14 a share, June, $140 a share. You know, an incredible run, but not so much since then. So I wonder, I don't know, but I wonder if we have just a bit more chop in Nvidia from now. You know, where we don't perhaps see anywhere near the same sort of gains that we've seen before. I don't know. But for me, again, I'd still be happier. I wouldn't do anything is my opinion. But if I had to do something, I'd probably be happier shorting it rather than buying it at the moment. But if I was a buyer, you know, where would my stop go? It's probably going to be all the way down here at $90, which is a big old stop. It's a 25% stop, isn't it, pretty much, from where it is now. But I'd be quite tempted to be short with a stop either above 131 or 140. But really, I'm a bit on the fence about it all, in all honesty. C3AI. What is that? C3AI. Don't know. I don't think it's that, is it? If there's another way of explaining what that is, because I don't know what that is. SNDR. Don't know what that is. SNDR. Schneider National. Transportation and trucking. Good old-fashioned business. A little bit boring, I'd say. What would you reckon? It's a bit sideways, isn't it? Overall. SNDR. Well, you know, it's definite. It's got a definite range, isn't it? Low 20s. You want to be a buyer. And here we are at 27 now. We're just sort of halfway through the range, aren't we? So for me, they're always a bit coin flippy stocks like that. So yeah, don't know. It's just a bit. I mean, it really is quite the sideways stock, if that's the right stock. So yeah, so not too much for me. Coinbase, what have they done? I'm going to guess they've been a bit boring, Coinbase, because the crypto world has been a bit quiet. But let's have a look. Yes. I don't know. It looks a bit, again, I don't really have, if I had to do anything, I'd probably be tempted to go short, probably, with a stop above 220 on Coinbase. Nice trend when Bitcoin was gaining. And then because we've seen, I don't know about other cryptos, obviously, but because Bitcoin's been a bit sideways, I guess that has an impact on the likes of Coinbase. So yeah, nothing. Perhaps short if I had to do anything, like I said. So yeah, Qualcomm. I would. Again, it's another one where I'd be a bit on the fence. If I had to do anything, I'd be a buyer, all right? So I'd take the view. We had a great trend, bang, 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 fell out the trend, but the old lows at 156 pretty much held. So if I was a buyer now, I'd put a stop under 150-ish is what I would do. But of course, as usual, there are always two sides to every market. You know, you could go short if you thought, okay, this Qualcomm is on the turn. I'd go short with a stop over 185. I think it is more difficult at the moment than it was obviously on the way up for a lot of these markets. When markets were trending higher, you know, like when we had the NASDAQ roaring away, it was relatively easy to stick and pick with winners. I think it's much harder when markets get a bit choppy like this, and understandably, we're seeing that in a lot of the stocks markets getting a bit choppy. So yeah, I'm don't have too strong an opinion on that one, Qualcomm, but I'd be a buyer. Supermicro, I thought it was interesting yesterday, wasn't it? Supermicro computer. I mean, again, what an absolute powerhouse this was. So if we go back to beginning of 23, $87 a share, and then March 24, $1,200 a share. I mean, that for me, that if you didn't see the story this week, a hedge fund put out some research questioning their financial reporting or something, which always sends, I think, you know, shockwaves through anything. It's quite, and then said we are actually short. It's quite handy, that, isn't it, to go short something then and say, do you know what, maybe the financials are a bit dodgy. So the stock was hit hard yesterday, or was it yesterday, Wednesday? So it went from 550 down to 400. So that's what, a 30% drop. But for me, you know, I would say the trend is still down. You know, we've seen some big levels broken on Supermicro Computer. They're almost a third of what they were just in March. So, you know, it is a crazy volatile stock. You know, if we just look in the last week, it's gone from 627 to 400. It's a massive range, isn't it? So for me, I'd sell it. I'd sell a rally in Supermicro Computer. But in reality, it is too volatile for me. The old Supermicros. J&J, would you be short J&J? Johnson & Johnson. Oh, wrong one. Hang on a second. J&J. Oh, would I be short? It looks quite strong, doesn't it? Oh, do you know, I think I would be. I would, but I'd be a little bit concerned, but I would go short now. I think on that one. So the trend is down. So the trend has been down since April 22. Here's the trend line, blah, blah, blah. If I was going to go short, the closest I'd have my stop, probably 168. And interesting to see, does it start to roll over? But of course, again, the flip side, if we are seeing a switch out of the higher tech growth stocks to the more traditional blue chippy type stocks, well, they're all blue chip really, aren't they? Maybe we do see this thing come out of its trend, come out of its downtrend. Interesting one. But at the moment, I would have to go short with at least a 168 something stop, I think, on that. But an interesting one to watch next week. Have your US stocks done in August? Also, what would you do with the Nikkei? I gave back a chunk of profit in my US stocks in August on that sell-off, which was always the risk. I still have a few positions left at the moment, but I came out with a whole load of them, so I gave back a lot of profit. It's still up overall, but yeah, it was a bit painful beginning of August, which is why I'm having a month off from US stocks and back into it in September. I've still got some good performers in there, like IBM was a long from June. I had a short Dollar Tree that I came out of recently. That had been a really good short, Dollar Tree. Oh, they're down again today. I did come out of that one at around about 98. So there's a few in there, but there's a load that were definitely a casualty of that big sell-off. I'm still in that one, Tractor Supply Company. So there's still a few decent winners in there. But TGX, I'm still in that one as well. But yeah, I took a big hit on some of those stocks. So giving back profit, which is, unfortunately, it's the name of the game, isn't it? If we're going for big trends, we are going to give back profit now and again. And August, that was a particularly brutal move for me. What would you do with nickel? Nickel. We've clearly looked at this before because I've drawn some squiggles on it. I'd probably buy it. What do you reckon? If I had to do anything? It's interesting, isn't it? I would buy that. So we had the downtrend in nickel from December 22 to here, earlier this year. Was building an uptrend, all good. Goes crashing through the uptrend. Did have a little dibble below the lows for the year, but it's come back again. I buy it. So if I was a buyer today, I would still have my stop underneath that low in July. 25th of July low at 15.6. So let's say, I mean, it's pretty volatile, isn't it? Let's say 15,000 stop, buy them at 16.8. So the risk is 1,800. If it goes back up to the May highs, there's a lot of reward there potentially, isn't it? So that's an interesting market. So for me, that's what I would do. I'd be a buyer. It is a bit worrying that it did build this recovery and then completely sailed through it. So that might make me cautious. But I would give it the benefit of the doubt and be a buyer with a stop the other side of 15.6 personally. So have a quick look at this dollar. I better not miss this short. I don't think I'm going to miss this short. Oh, I think that is though. Oh, okay. Blah, blah, blah. AMD stock, Advanced Micro Devices. It's another tricky one, I think. There's a lot of tricky ones at the moment. What do you reckon? The big trend is up. If we go back to October 22, big trend is up. I'd buy it. I don't know where I'd put my stop though. And I think I'd probably want to be a bit more patient. Perhaps the other side of 116. But of course you could argue, because let's not forget, I think it's perhaps when we first come to trading, we naively believe that it's obvious whether something's going to go up or down. That is never the case. There are always two sides to every market. You could absolutely look at that since March and say, well, look, the trend is down. I want to be a seller of strength. So bigger trend is up. Trend for the last 5 months is down. I'd probably rather sit on my hands. So yeah, that's it. Intel. What did Intel do? Oof. I mean, for me, it's just nothing. I'd rather sell a rally, but it's absolutely, collapsed, doesn't it? Since those earnings, gone from $30 to 20. I suppose, again, if you were bottom fishing and thinking, surely Intel is a bargain down here, then one approach is a buyer with a stop under that ultimate low from August, which is $18.90. That's maybe, if you really thought, buy them and file them away and see what happens over the next year. But for me, I would rather be a seller, but it's collapsed so much, it's difficult to know where to get the short on, isn't it? I would suggest, let's have a quick look through some of my old ones and see if there's anything interesting in there. Dollar Tree, I'm short that. CBOE, I was long that. Apple, see, even Apple. What would you, I don't know. International Paper, I'm still in that. International Paper, that's done all right. TJX. General Dynamics was a good one for me earlier this year, but again, that's gone a bit sideways. AJG, Arthur J. Gallagher's a good one. Great trend in that. So there are still stocks out there with good trends. Houlihan Lokey, they're just difficult. Oh, Aflac. I was in that earlier in the year, never managed to get back onto it. Is there any shorts? What's that? Coca-Cola. I'm still in that trade, Coca-Cola. AstraZeneca, still in that. But a lot of stuff. Bank of New York. McKesson, I mean, that had been a really good stock for me this year. That for me. So I would buy that. I'm not in it at the moment. But again, big sell-off on earnings. Big trend still up. And the old lows at $515 held. So I think, for me, stocks like that are interesting. But they're a bit more few and far between at the moment. That's doing well, isn't it? HCA Healthcare. FedEx, I was in that. I came out of that. Yeah. There we go. What do you think about crude oil? I've got not much of an opinion on crude oil. We did have a look at it. It's a bit stuck in the middle at the moment for me. You know, there's the dailies on crude oil. What do you do? You know, if you look on the hourlies, there we go. We're all a bit sideways, aren't we? So if it dips down to maybe 73, I'd be a buyer. But it's all sort of a bit halfway through the range at the moment. So like I say, the interesting market for me this afternoon, NASDAQ. Does this old level at 19,635 be a problem? And dollar index, I am going to go short dollar index this afternoon, assuming it doesn't take out that high so far. I'll go short that because I think the trend is still down, and that's it. Then I'm finished for the day. So we're going to wrap things up there. Thanks for coming along. Hope you found it useful. If you'd like to join the WhatsApp group, join it. Use the code YouTube for a 20% discount for the first month. Very entertaining group. Lots of contributions from everybody in the group. I think there's about 45, 50 people in the group. So it works quite well. Go to the website, find out more about that. If you want to find out who I trade with, go there, bit.ly, David Trade. All the details are in the thing below, the description below. Be back next week for the non-farm payrolls. I'll do another video next week. If you haven't seen the videos I do, I've started doing a slightly different format of videos. Here we go. Talking about my open trades. So last week I talked about pound and crude oil. This week I've talked about natural gas and platinum. I'm out of the natural gas trade. I'm still in the platinum trade. So I'll do another one of those. This is what I'm trading trades videos, next week. To get regular updates, join the WhatsApp group. Otherwise, see you all next Friday. Have a good weekend. Don't lose all your money. And let's see where we are this time next week. Okay, thanks for coming along.